We're now going to look at the first 3 or 4 comic scenes in Dr. Faustus. You'll have completed an essay on this topic, so this is just a reminder, and I'll revise some general background information as well. There's simply too much comedy in Faustus for it to come under the bland label of comic relief, as we sometimes apply to things like the Porter scene in Macbeth, for example. As you know, however, comic scenes were very popular in the medieval morality plays, in which there was less distinction between comedy and tragedy. Favourite devices included farce, physical comedy and slapstick, and a concentration on what Bakhtin has called the bodily lower stratum, matters to do with eating, digestion, excretion, and sex, not all at once. Remember the excerpt we looked at from Mankind, for example. The devil figures lead the audience in a vulgar song, and one of them urinates on the other's foot by mistake. In Dr. Faustus, much of the comedy is of this type. But why is it there? First of all, making the audience laugh can, in a way, make us morally complicit. In the medieval plays, there always comes a point where the audience suddenly realises that this is all actually very serious. They may even feel guilty, and so the play's ultimately didactic intent comes through. And secondly, the comic scenes are part of Dr. Faustus's complex structure, offering ironic parallels and perhaps commentary on the actions in the play's main plot. Act 1, Scene 2. This basically consists of 2 of Faustus's fellow scholars asking where he is, and Wagner, his servant, mocking them with a very long-winded and elaborate reply. It parodies and mocks the way in which academic and philosophical discussions were held, not least as he uses this to answer a very simple question. Linguistically, the most obvious parody is the sarcastic use of my dear brethren, a conventional honorific used amongst scholars. We've just seen Act 1, Scene 1. Faustus has indulged in a lengthy soliloquy on the nature and scope of knowledge. This scene appears to be questioning how useful this knowledge actually is. In Act 1, Scene 4, Wagner threatens Robin the Clown with torments by devils unless he becomes his servant for 7 years. Now there's some obvious comic potential here, the visual image on stage of Robin's poverty, for example. As we know from Shakespeare, lower-class characters were always good for a laugh. Do feel free, by the way, to look over your 12th Night coursework notes from last year. Try to apply some of the same style of analysis to these sections of Faustus. Robin uses malapropisms and double meanings, such as the confusion between stave's acre and knave's acre, and the little extract I've put up here. Wagner threatens to turn his fleas into familiars, meaning devils. Robin interprets this in the way we'd understand more readily. They're too familiar with him already. He misunderstands Wagner's pretentious use of Latin later on. Indeed, he can't even get the names of the devils right. Look at the bottom, all the ways he mishears and reproduces them. It reminds me rather of Bottom in A Midsummer Night's Dream and Ninny's Tomb. But again, there are echoes of what's just come. Faustus, in Act 1, Scene 3, conjures up Mephistopheles. At the start of this scene, Wagner's words about Robin selling his soul for a shoulder of mutton is an ironic parody of Faustus's bargain. Robin makes it even clearer. Obviously, his response should be that he wouldn't give his soul at all, but instead he says, yes, I would give my soul to the devil for a shoulder of mutton, but it's got to be nicely cooked and with some decent sauce. Wagner's engagement of Robin will also prove just as pointless and fruitless as Faustus's engagement of Mephistopheles. Later on in the scene, looking at the quotations I've highlighted here, we see Robin's desires and aspirations when he's tempted by this demonic power are ultimately ironic reflections of Faustus himself. First of all, we can see that he completely underestimates the power of demons and of hell. So he says, if they come here, I'll knock them. They were never so knocked since they were devils, and he'll be called Old Kill Devil all the parish over. Rather like Faustus, not really knowing what he's let himself in for. And finally, look at the very bottom, at the end of the scene. Wagner says, yes, if you serve me, I'll let you turn yourself into any creature you like. Robin says, oh, I'll turn into a flea so I can tickle the pretty wench's plackets. The gloss in your edition tells you what this means. Once again, Bakhtin in humour, the bodily lower stratum, matters of sex and so on, but also rather similar to what Faustus ultimately accomplishes. Act 2, Scene 2. Again, the patterns of imitation repeat themselves. Wagner has imitated Faustus, and now Robin is imitating Wagner. He has stolen one of Faustus's books and intends to conjure for his own use. We can see from the dialogue that each of these characters, getting lower and lower in social status, understands less and less of what they're getting themselves in for. Again, this scene imitates what's come before. Having signed off his soul, Faustus is now apparently reaping the various rewards of his contract, including, at the very end, some books. The focus here is on base bodily pleasures. Here they're sexual. As Faustus has asked for a wife, a hot whore, Robin fantasises about making all the maidens in our parish dance at my pleasure stark naked before me. I do like, by the way, how he then openly admits to the audience that his current sex life isn't really the greatest. Rafe continues the innuendo, the gentleman having his things rubbed. Your text will remind you of the threefold meaning of bear with me, and private study is also quite obvious. It's all very Bakhtinian with a focus on eating, drinking, and sex. But finally, another line sticks out for me. I'll feed thy devil with horse bread, says Rafe. Surely a naive underestimation, reducing the devil to a pet. But isn't this, in a way, what Faustus's contract, which we've just seen him read out and sign, seeks to do to Mephistopheles? Finally, Act 3, Scene 2. Robin finally succeeds in conjuring up an irate Mephistopheles. The scene has started with a comic reminder of how he and Rafe are using their own magic powers. What follows might seem pure silliness. Essentially, he steals a goblet from the vintner, and they mock him by juggling it around, finally using magic. But we've just had the scene with the Pope, Act 3, Scene 1. All Faustus actually does here, essentially, is mess up the Pope's dinner and throw around the tableware. At the end, Mephistopheles turns up. He's not happy, you can see that here. Robin gets turned into an ape, Rafe into a dog. And amusingly, they're not too fussed about that. How? Into an ape? That's brave. I can see two reflections, perhaps, of the main plot here. Firstly, their lack of concern at what has happened. Funny and endearing in a way, but throughout all this they've totally misunderstood what is happening. Robin seems genuinely unable to conceptualise matters of hell and damnation. Look at his words to Mephistopheles. You've come from Constantinople. Oh, that was a long journey. Were the trains bad? Etc, etc, etc. Faustus, is this a reflection? By this point of the play, is he still genuinely naive? Or a contrast? By this point, he should know better. Secondly, this more straightforwardly illustrates the morality play context. They get what they deserve. This can't act as a warning to Faustus, as he's not there to see it, but possibly, for the audience, it foreshadows his ultimate downfall.